Hi, everyone, and welcome to my world. I am Dr. Kristen, one of the good doctors of Abbey Research, and the point of this series is part of Abbey Research's ongoing work to educate around empathy and understanding that different people are different, and that's fantastic. And in this series, I get to have chats with people who are different than me, which is everybody, about an element of their life that shapes their lives differently than mine. And today I have a seminary colleague named Megan Pike, who serves as a chaplain. Let me pull up her bio so I get this all incredibly correct, because there's a lot of letters, because chaplaincy requires a lot of training. Megan serves at Blessing Hospital in Quincy, Illinois as staff chaplain. She's an ordained Baptist minister and endorsed by the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship for chaplaincy. She's earned 4 units of Level II ACPE CPE and 4 units of CPSP CPE. Her time at Blessing Health System, in her time, Megan has brought fresh ideas of spiritual care and emotional support to the team of staff, stipend, and volunteer chaplains in order to meet the unique demands associated with providing care in the midst of a global pandemic. I can't even begin to imagine. Megan is currently working on board certification. That's so many things I don't know anything about, and I can't wait to learn. Megan, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And if you wouldn't just mind telling us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I actually grew up in Arkansas and have an undergraduate degree in recreation, which is a legitimate degree. And I ended up on a path of pursuing ministry and have been able to work with people from a variety of backgrounds all over the world. I lived abroad in Morocco for 2 years before coming back to the States in 2010, and ended up finding a seminary program that fit well with just my interests and my background at Truett Seminary at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. I love the idea of being at a seminary that was on a university campus because I have experience doing college ministry.
Okay.
And also just the opportunity to have a large international student population to interact with as well was very appealing to me. So I would say that my experience at Truett was a very unpacking, repacking experience for me. I had come from a Lutheran background just with my family. And then by the time I was in college, I got involved with Baptist collegiate ministry, and then was grateful to find a home in the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship as a woman in ministry. And so I didn't really know about CBF until I went to Truett. And then I I loved the opportunity to work with a variety of organizations in Waco. I worked with Habitat for Humanity and their Restore, and I also had a chance to work with Campus Recreation to kind of tie in that background and um, getting to work with college students through those outlets was really great. Also worked with Mission Waco, Mission World, which was just a really valuable and challenging experience, helping to lead their poverty simulation, and then also working with volunteer groups that came in to serve through the organization. My spouse and I met at Truett, and so he is also an ordained minister, and so we are navigating what it's like to be a 2-minister household.
Ooh,
And
that's a
so
lot of boundary setting.
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. So so we actually moved to Little Rock from Waco, so that
Okay.
way we could pursue a call that he had received to serve at a church. And then I had to try to navigate what it would be like to be a Baptist woman in ministry in Arkansas, which was actually more difficult than I thought it was going to be. We got involved with foster care in Little Rock and ended up having a really difficult first placement situation that kind of overlapped into, talk about boundaries, just overlapped into my work and church, and so came out of that situation ultimately with a church hurt experience, and found chaplaincy as a place of respite. Honestly, it was kind of a big aha for me in my first year of residency that one of the things that ironically was missing in that church hurt experience was good pastoral care. And then I found myself studying and working on developing my own pastoral care skills in chaplaincy. So I had a great group that I was able to process that experience with in a community like Little Rock that's kind of small. And then decided I wanted to continue pursuing it. So I went to my first year of residency was at a state hospital, a medical school training hospital, which was a really good experience. Level I trauma center, so full on everything and anything. And then my second year of residency was at a faith-based hospital, also in Little Rock, and so that was just an opportunity to get involved in what that could look like, and also be able to navigate what it's like to be a person that values and advocates for religious liberty in a faith-based hospital setting. So I had a little bit of culture shock, to be honest, whenever I first started, because it was very Baptist, and so it was very interesting for me, because I wanted to advocate for those that claim a faith, no faith, and be able to provide a safe space for them to work out their issues spiritually and emotionally. So, yeah.
There's so much to unpack there. So just really quickly, I want to do a couple of translation points for my viewers. So first of all, for people who don't know, Protestants are a whole breed and variety in and of ourselves. So what Megan said there was that she grew up in one tradition, ended up getting professional theological training in another tradition, which is the tradition, which is my story too. I was not raised Baptist. I went to Truett for this. I became Baptist for the scholarship that they offered there in being Baptist. And Baptist is not a traditional denomination that you think of, that there's like all the structures or everything else like that. Baptist churches join together in consensual groupings. And what you think of as Baptist, if you've never met a Baptist or never interacted with Baptists, is probably a more conservative, socially and theological end of that spectrum, where our seminary fell, and what Megan said, the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship falls much more on the moderate side, both theologically and socially. And one of the major divisions within Baptist life is the issue of women in ministry, which is one of the reasons that Megan highlighted that. Tour de force, really, really quickly. Also, when Megan says religious liberty, because we are fellows of the same organization, I know this, she means in a truest sense of the First Amendment, that Congress shall pass no laws, and we can't force anybody to be part of a religion, and America will never be a Christian nation in that way. So it's not potentially the way the phrase is being used on the news. That's not what we mean. So all of that, just kind of quick tour de force. We are part of the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty, which I'll link to below, and we have a privilege of serving with them. And I'm hoping to get some of the staff to have conversations with me around this, because they're just such incredibly wise people that I learn from constantly. But you guys have already met Sophie Herscher if you are a continual watcher of this channel. And Sophie and I met through the same program that Megan's a part of too. We just happened to be in two different classes. So we didn't get to yell at Thomas Jefferson together, but we've all had that experience. So anyway, back to Megan. I love this idea of pastoral care, and I want to stop there for a minute and then unpack that. And then I'd love to move on to what it's like to be essentially an interfaith pastor in a way. But really quick, like when you say like pastoral care, what kind of skills are you talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is, it's funny, I'm working on my board certification process right now, so it's a lot of having to flesh that out in writing. But so yeah, exactly. So essentially it's being someone that can validate people's experiences. That's a huge part of it. Normalizing people's experiences, providing, I mentioned like a safe space, and essentially what that can look like is being a calm, non-anxious presence in the midst of crisis.
That is massive. I can imagine. And because crisis, I mean, you're particularly dealing with health crises primarily, but I'd imagine there's other little crises that attach to the health crises, financial, emotional. I'm sure there's family drama. that you have to help folks walk through.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So there's, it's interesting because it's a lot of times, you have the patient themselves that are in the bed, but there's all these other patients kind of around the room, as family members are allowed back in hospitals to be able to visit their loved ones. And so it has a far-reaching, kind of impact on how the person is cared for and what are the values and what kind of conversations are they having and who is deciding some of those big decisions regarding the patient's care and those types of things. So
And would you be on like their care team or?
absolutely. Yeah. So chaplains are clinical members of the patient's care team.
Great.
And so we respond a lot of times to requests. Of course, we're also making initial visits with patients that are coming into the hospital. And we're also a liaison between a lot of times what's going on here at the hospital with local clergy, people, that lead faith communities outside of in their local context or are able to come in and help provide that link. So like yesterday, a patient's family member asked if we could bring in a priest to provide services to that patient. And so we're able to make that connection as we do not have a full-time Catholic chaplain priest that's on our staff. So.
Right. Yeah. And what a burden that must lift for them, because they, especially if they're from out of town or it's not their local, like you guys just have those networks for them. I can't.
Absolutely.
That would be so.
And that was exactly what happened yesterday. So they were coming in from out of town. And so we were able to provide that.
Yeah, because
connection.
There's so many. It's fascinating. I was just having this conversation with somebody about the different death traditions we have in the United States and how there are some, deep communities, especially in the American South, that have a very different relationship with death than we do up here in the Northeast, where I live in Philadelphia. And yet I grew up in a largely Jewish community. And so I grew up with sitting Shiva, and I've never understood why Christians don't sit Shiva, because it just is, it's like the grief we do with our bodies, but we don't talk about death. So I would imagine a huge part of your training would be learning to navigate like death rituals in a certain way of like what has to be, like how different people are going to interact with that. Is that you're nodding? So I'm assuming that has been part of your training.
Absolutely. Okay. So in these CPE clinical pastoral education units that we do, we have different didactics that cover different topics around theology, culture, different religious traditions, those types of things. And so I would, so in our context, we have, the acute care hospital, but we also have a hospice and palliative care unit that operates, outside in the community, but also we have those hospice patients here, in the hospital as well. If they're not able to transfer somewhere else, they're not stable enough to do that. So absolutely, I would say, daily, you're dealing with either the patient themselves considering death, or they're processing the death of a loved one. I had a visit yesterday where that was a big part of the conversation with the patient, was just how well her parents died and how she hopes for that. And so it was just it's definitely, on people's hearts and minds whenever they're dealing with a health, situation that puts that in perspective for them. So.
And how long is somebody in the hospital before they can access your services? Is it like pretty much the minute they get checked in, like they can talk to you? Okay. There's not a limit, like you have to be here for a couple days or something.
No, and in each hospital will do things a little bit differently, of course. Yeah. And so we have a process where whenever a patient is either coming in through the emergency department, or if they're being admitted, they are asked a series of questions, and one of those is, including their spiritual, emotional support and what's important to them. Would they like to see a hospital chaplain?
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And so then I want to touch back into this interfaith aspect here.
Sure.
I love so much that your priority is this, to respect the spiritual tradition of whoever you're in front of, and kind of what that looks like. I'd imagine that's also sometimes challenging to explain to religions that have been marginalized so often in the United States, that they hear, Protestant or Baptist chaplain, and they have some baggage.
Mm-hmm.
How do you work through with people explaining, no, I don't care what I come with. I'm here to be for you. Like, what's that process like?
Sure. So a lot of times people, especially in my context here, we have a strong volunteer chaplain base.
Okay.
That is actually was the history, like the founding body of chaplains here in this hospital. And so a lot of times those were clergy members in the community. And so there's a lot of background to people that come in the hospital really assuming that I'm a volunteer or I'm serving somewhere else, which
Got it.
Is part of the history of chaplaincy anyways. And so my easy answer to that is I say, well, whenever they ask me where I serve, I say, well, I'm a full-time chaplain here and this is my parish. And, and they seem to connect with that. And then it's interesting because people reflect on that idea of like, well, you got a big job to do. And I said, I know, you all just keep showing up. So,
it's less evangelicalism than some other parishes.
So it's kind of, makes it a little bit lighthearted, but it also, I think they understand the value of it, that we have 2 staff chaplains and we have stipend chaplains, we have volunteer chaplains.
Can I pause you? What's a stipend chaplain? I don't know.
So that could sure. So stipend is typically like a contract or PRN as needed chaplain, and we've definitely needed our stipend chaplains this past year just to help maintain coverage because our volunteer chaplains have not been able to serve. We haven't had our volunteer chaplains for over a year now.
And that has been COVID protocol?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that leads into my next question. So I don't want to make you unpack the trauma of living through the last year.
Sure.
But has there been anything about how humans are processing this that has surprised you?
I think just so I got COVID in July and from a patient encounter, and I will say just the evolution of how we approached it. I mean, I kind of have been reflecting, on just the last year with March being a big kickoff for so many places and hospitals and communities of going into lockdown and going into these protocols, and just thinking about how we started out with cloth masks here in the hospital, and and then we evolved into the procedure masks, and then that you just the evolution that we've as we learned more, we understood more because and then the one thing that probably has surprised me the most though is just the variety of impact that this has had on people. Like some people got it and they felt like it was no big deal and they moved on with their life and it wasn't really that big of a deal. Obviously there's other people that got it and they died, and so it's just such a strange virus in how it impacts people. And so that has been just, I think, hard for people to kind of wrap their heads and their hearts around because it's just not the same for everybody, and it's so new obviously still, and trying to better understand it. Because I was laughing at this sign that I saw that initially the questions were, have you traveled out of the country? Do you have these 3 symptoms? Well, now, there's posters that have like 15 symptoms, and so just, just to have to understand more about it and then realize how it evolved, and then just how it's just impacts people so differently.
Yeah, so. I know both of we've had a couple employees here who have gotten it, thankfully mild cases all around. But 2 of them, their like presenting symptom that drove them to end up getting tested was lower back pain. And like that is not one that we hear reported a lot, but that was the presenting symptom that, and then they were like, oh, I might have a fever. Yeah, I have been coughing a little bit, but it was the back pain that sent them there. And
fascinating.
Yeah, I think I love that point that you like the evolution of this has been what we've learned. And I think we are so used to I feel this way as Americans, like assuming that science kind of knew everything and
Mm-hmm.
they'll have
Mm-hmm.
answers for us quickly. And, blood tests are fast and kind of all these things. And I think what we've all had to learn over the last year is that just as in emotionally and in society, as we learn more, we do better. Science, like hard science, is the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
giving grace to those of you who are on the front lines, trying to hold a lot of people's hands and a lot of emotions all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So my final question is to do a little bit more personally, but do you have any sort of self-care or boundary routine that lets you hold this much grief for strangers?
Well, I regularly see a therapist. So
Great.
I'm a big advocate of that. Actually, whenever we moved from Little Rock to here in Quincy, I think, the biggest people that I sought out were my, hairstylist and a therapist. And I actually found the therapist first, which was, that's like my first thing to seek out. And um, I thankfully have a wonderful therapist
Great.
and have just really appreciated her support. And she is definitely a big part of my self-care, going to see her every other week, because it's just a place to be able to process, my safe space,
Yeah.
to be able to process and just try to unpack, what I've experienced and how I'm, coping with that myself. So that's my go-to. Now that the weather is getting nicer here, just trying to get outside and be with my family, I think, is a big part of recharging and just taking care of myself. So, yeah.
We are all solar powered, whether we realize it or
Right.
not. We're just
Yeah.
like plants. Turn us to the sun and water us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh. Well, Megan, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to throw some resources and some links in the show notes, guys, that Megan has provided, in case you've got more questions about chaplaincy or are even maybe niggling about it, the idea yourself. There's going to be some great stuff in the show notes. So, Megan, thank you again.
Yeah.
And
Thank
to
you.
everybody else, I will see you next time on Welcome to My World.